workflow and then with the goal to get their product or service off the ground. And so I would say the worst questions that an implementation manager can get during this process are, where are we at? When are we going to get the good product or service that we purchased, and what's next? We make our users look like rock stars by providing answers to those questions through technology. I would say the best companies in the world make it so customers don't have to call them, right? They provide them access to that information they need in order to, plan accordingly on their end.
That's amazing. So let's talk about origin story. How did you get started in this? What did you do before? How did the idea come to you? And then how did you start getting into it?
So I had the fortunate experience of being a part of a startup before this. It was a company called DealerSocket. Our main customer was the automotive dealership.
Okay.
And I'm always careful when I describe kind of automotive dealerships because, it covers the whole spectrum, if you will, of who we are typically trying to engage, right? You have literally immigrants that just came over on a boat or on a plane, and the first job is selling a car. We're teaching them how to use DealerSocket, which was a CRM, all the way to MBA grads that are running large automotive groups like AutoNation and Penske, and so we had a whole spectrum of users we were trying to engage and trying to guide through a process once we sold them our product or service, and that was a blessing in disguise because it was our biggest challenge with that company. Was after we sold our CRM, we needed to pull data from the manufacturer. We needed to pull data from their website. We needed to pull data from them, their ERP solution. There was oftentimes over 15 different integrated partners involved in our implementation effort.
Wow.
And we always got those questions like, when are we going to get DealerSocket? Who's next? Where are we at during this process? And there are some common themes that often happen during our implementations. It was, we would sell the GM or the owner of the dealership our product. And that person, after we sold them, would often remove themselves from the experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're dealing with a whole different set of users that didn't participate in the sales process. So that was one challenge. The next challenge was
with a blank slate, right?
Yeah. And so we weren't arming the contract signer with the information necessary in order to hold his team accountable.
Right.
Nor did his team know what was even purchased in most cases. And the second thing was, who's responsible for what, clearly identifying, who's handed off the ball during, the process, what dependencies exist. And then the third question was, when's the forecasted end date? Like, when are we going to get this product that we bought? We have to plan, right? We have to cancel other services to start your service. We have to, get all of our salespeople here to be trained, all of our service techs. I mean, so anyways, those three questions were kind of the impetus of my frustration, if you will. Like I say, the greatest products in the world are built off the founder's biggest frustrations. I'm a salesperson by nature. And so, I would have to meet with my sales team on a weekly basis and tell them which deals we were pulling back commission on because deals never went live. And oftentimes because we weren't answering those three questions. The pain finally got significant enough to where I jumped ship. And I want to, just clarify, DealerSocket, phenomenal company, phenomenal product, best CRM in the automotive space. We just slayed it. Our dealers love us, but there was, about 20% of our business that was churning after sale. And so I'm a firm believer that, the renewal is one during the initial process.
Yeah. And I mean, I think like a lot of founders, you saw a problem and you wanted to solve it, right? So what did it look like starting? Did you, go out and find a development company? Did you just raise capital? Like, what did it take to take this from just like a thought in your head to something tangible?
Yeah. So I I left early 2018 Dealer Socket, and I'm a big believer that like I don't want to side gig anything. I knew that if I was going to give this opportunity the chance it deserved, I needed to go all in. And I also wanted to, bootstrap. Like I was, the Dealer Socket story is interesting in that the founders bootstrapped that company for the first 10 years. And so I kind of went into this a little ignorant. Like I didn't really understand kind of the fundraising market. I didn't know people would fund founders pre-revenue.
Right.
I remember going to networking events for startups, and the question I'd always get was, well, hey, how much money have you raised? And I'm like, I don't have customers. Like, I'm not raising any money. And so I kind of, I bootstrapped for the first 18 months, but kind of rewinding back to the start, there was 3 books I read that really shaped the mentality of kind of how I built the product. One book was called The Mom Test. And that the concept of that book is all about don't ask for feedback from your mom. She'll always lie to you. If she's anything like my mom, she thinks I'm amazing, but
That's right.
Truth is probably watered down, divided by 2. The second book was Lean Startup.
Yep.
That's the popular one, right? Like, don't build the rocket ship, just build off of iteration. And then the third book was The User Method. And that's like, hey, Henry Ford, right? He built an automobile. He didn't necessarily listen to his customers. He just listened to the problem that they were experiencing and then innovated. So triangulating the theories of those 3 books, I went on LinkedIn. I searched second level contacts, people with implementation managers in their title. I interviewed 116 people at different companies. These are people I didn't know. And this was all with the goal to like green light the process. And I came up with 14 pilot customers out of that 116. And the message to them was, hey, like, I don't have a product. I have an idea. This is kind of what it's going to look like. I'd hired a designer to kind of mock up some screens. I'm like, if I built this, would you use it? And they're like, well, when will you have it? And I kind of set a date set a date in the calendar of March 9th, 2018. And we hit it, right? It was, it's embarrassing to kind of deliver that product. All pretty much what you do is log in.
Well, but, that's how it always is. If you're not a little embarrassed by your first release, then you're doing something wrong, right?
Yeah. And it was, I mean, I always look back. We have like, out of those initial 14, we still have 9 of those customers. And when I talk to them, I'm like, what were you thinking? How come you agreed to this? And the message to them, though, the pilot agreement basically said that, hey, I don't know what this is going to cost, but I will on July 1st. And on June 1st, I was going to say, hey, 30 days before July 1st, I'll tell you what it'll cost. And then you can say yes or no. And so on July 1st, I had paying customers.
Wow.
And I had 12 of those 14. They agreed to pay me. And that's when I hired my first employee, and the rest is history. So.
Yeah. And, it's a common story that I hear in us interviewing founders, is this idea of starting with either a, phantom product or getting in an initial test group. But there are founders out there that try and build some big rocket ship, like we've heard, before they even put it out to the market. So how important was it for you to go out there and validate this idea?
Well, I think this is one of the advantages of like bootstrapping. I'm a big fan of bootstrappers. If I were to ever invest in a founder early startup, like I think bootstrapping would be super attractive to me. And the reason is I think money clouds judgment in the early stages. And what I mean by that is, it forces you to make some really tough decisions. When I built my MVP, I remember I hired a designer. I was paying him $150 an hour. And at that point in time, like it was, I mean, every check I was writing, it was like, oh man, like this is coming out of my own bank account. And then, explaining to my wife that, hey, this is the vision. It's okay. We're going to, see this through. And so, I had thought that I was going to spend, X amount on this MVP. I ended up spending double and then launching a quarter of the stuff that I wanted to spend to launch. And
That's
it was
common.
that process of iteration of like making those really tough decisions, kind of trying to stick to a budget while spending double what my budget was, to get a paying customer on the board. And I look back at some of those early decisions. If I would have launched, 100% of what my MVP was, I would have made a lot of wrong decisions. Like I had a lot of features and functions in there that our customers didn't care about in the early stages. And so, yeah, like the blessing was, I couldn't spend unlimited amounts of money. If I would have had, a $5 million seed round, like I would have done it all.
Right.
And that would have been a bad business decision.
And they talk about the 80-20 rule, where most users are only using 20% of your product. And so there is all this like extra fat that needs cut at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly. I'm a big believer in this iteration process. Listen to your users. I mean, that's how you create evangelists, right? I mean, these individuals, they had a pain. It was the same pain I felt in my previous life. They understood the vision. They understood where they were going, and so it forced me to help them partner with the concept, the idea, the vision, rather than just try to sling a product at them. And that creates exponentially better first customers than someone you're always saying yes to, right? Yeah. You're always saying, okay, yeah, I'll build that. No, like get them to understand the vision, get them to understand what you're doing, get them to believe in you, and then, right, the future is predictable because they believe in you, right? And they're gonna kind of jump through some hoops, do a few extra strokes, click a few extra clicks, because they know where the product's going.
No, that's right on point. But I'm interested in, how did that evolve over time for you? Because the one thing I think is, as products become more mature and you get more clients, is you get more opinions. More people want more bells and whistles and features or something custom. And I'm always intrigued for how startups and SaaS founders, how do they take all that noise and bring it down to a focused product that's actually successful?
Yeah. And I'd add one more thing. It's like you always have the aspiration to grow within a target market that might not represent what your current current customers are. And so there's a fine balance on how much do you push upstream. And our target market, right? We cater to the enterprise SaaS company, but a lot of our early on customers were SMBs, and they helped us get to where we're at. So one is like hiring good people. Like I had an idea. I knew what problem I wanted to solve. There's 3 questions I wanted answered by my product. One, that's where are we at? Who's responsible for what? And what did I buy? Kind of to solve for the stakeholder, removing him or herself from the experience after they bought the product. But our first product hire, one of the cool things that happened was, he brought a new lens, a new perspective, and the vision kind of changed in that, hey, Amazon doesn't choose which fulfillment centers to send packages to. Technology does, right? And so it might not be a straight line across the country, but it's choosing the most optimal path based on the capacity of these fulfillment centers. And so, fast forward to today, our product isn't just kind of a white labeled portal. It's making it's helping managers make intelligent decisions on what the fastest path is to get their product or service from point A to point B based on their capacity and their resources. And so I didn't have in my MVP nor in my research like this box to say, hey, we need a resource management tool to compete with these other resource management players. But we discovered that need from our customers, and we innovated on our side through, that didn't come from me. It came from a great individual on our team. And it allowed us to not just copy a resource management tool and their functionality, but build it with this idea of kind of mimicking the supply chain management principles of like tracking a package to your people and their skill sets and, what they can offer. Now, what that means to our customers is they can accurately tell customers when they're going to get their good product or service based on their own capacity. And that's game changing, right? That's innovation. That's, as we're creating a category, like my goal is we have to be 10 times better than the status quo, or else they're not going to buy us. And features like that, like helped us up level and be 10 times better.
Do you guys consider that you've created a new category?
Yeah, I think we do, but an analyst, like early on, I'll give you one example. There's a popular analyst out in the space, G2 Crowd.
Yep.
I remember having calls with their CEO early on, Godard, because they had kind of cornered us into project management. And there's thousands of tools in project management. And
for sure.
I got introduced to Godard. Awesome person. Phenomenal success story on its own. I told him, I'm like, Godard, like, we're not project management. Just like Zendesk isn't project management. Like they help, support agents be more efficient, or outreach isn't project management. They help SDRs be more efficient. Like, we're a purpose-built application to help the implementation manager be more efficient at their job. And he goes, yeah, but you guys don't have competitors. You need competitors to be in a category. And I said, okay, like, how does that happen? Like, he goes, well, it's just a waiting game. Like, so then I started thinking, like, man, like, who's out in the space with the exact same value proposition as us? And it took about 18 months to 2 years for, competitors to creep up. And it's like, most people would be like, when I get on kind of some of these VC intro calls, their biggest thing is like, well, how are you creating a moat around your business? Like, what competitors exist? And my first thing is like, I'm grateful for my competitors. Like, they help me create the category. They're spreading awareness, and like we're number one in the category that G2 announced early in 2020. And no one's going to make a decision on a client onboarding tool without demoing the number one product. So like, this is awesome. So yeah, G2 recognized the category. They once we got a few competitors early 2020, and what that's done for our business is, I mean, it's hard to describe. Like, it's just created an exponential amount more of awareness. It's like quadrupled our lead count, helped us move upstream. People now, there's a third party validating that we should exist.
Well, one of the reasons I asked when you said creating a new category is that first mover concept and having to educate a market on, what a product is, because they're not familiar with it. There are challenges for other founders out there that are creating new categories.
Yeah, it's a catch-22. Our sale in the first 2.5-3 years was very competitive, or very educational. We were oftentimes replacing the generic project management tools.
Okay.
Right? It's like kind of a story of like, hey, we're purpose built for engaging customers with a transparent experience after the sale. And they're like, well, yeah, we use this generic platform. I'm like, yeah, but your customers can't log in. Because they're asked to log in, right? The UI isn't built for that experience. Like, a car dealer wouldn't understand what a Kanban board is. There's no time to value optimization. We don't understand kind of what bottlenecks exist in our process, because all you're doing is throwing Post-it notes on the screen. And so it was very educational. Now our sales kind of migrated into more of a competitive sale. And it's honestly a challenge for us, right? Because we've grown our go-to-market strategy based on kind of educating the consumer, which is awesome and it's helpful, but it's just part of the maturation process. Now it's like, okay, we need to talk about what the differentiation points are and why those are important. That hasn't been our MO. We've been talking about why transparency is important to the customer experience, how it increases trust, reduces anxiety. So yeah, I look at the classic examples, WebEx to the Zoom.
Right.
It's one skill set to create a category, which I think we've done. It's a whole nother skill set to lead it.
Yeah. Another question I always ask founders is how much attention do you pay to competitors? Just because I've dealt with a lot of founders over the years, and there's some that are obsessed, right? They're watching every feature that comes out. They're trying to pay attention. They're doing all these things. And then I've actually found other founders where they say, like, look, I ignore it. I've got my product, I've got my vision, and I'm just going forward. Where do you sit?
There's I forget where I read it, but there's a little quote I read in a blog where it's customer obsessed, competitor aware. And I think that's the fine line. It's like, hey, we build for our customers. And if we take care of our customers, we listen to them, we iterate based off their feedback, and then we kind of skate that fine line between, hey, what markets do we aspire to get into and what markets are our customers into, and kind of innovate in order to break into these higher tier markets. That's how we're going to succeed, but we can't ignore competitors, right? Like we have to be aware of them. But to like, there's been some instances where, some of our team has gotten really intimidated, or not intimidated, just I guess angry that maybe a competitor started a free trial with us.
Right.
And my comment is, guys, like, even if they copy every single feature we have, that's not why we're going to be successful. We're successful because we execute. We take care of our customers. The product is just a puzzle piece in the overall vision, right? And so competitor, customer obsessed, competitor aware is.
I love that quote. To that point about features, I'm kind of curious, what do you think has helped you grow or make the most impact? Because again, just going back to other conversations that I've had, technical founders might think about the features and functionality and how it scales. Guys from a sales background are going to be thinking about like, okay, what's my message to the marketplace? And obviously it's a mix of all these things, but what are some of those pieces that you think are important for a SaaS startup to be thinking about and get right, especially in the early days?
One category creation, you have to have patience. Sometimes the market, 100% of your market isn't ready for your product. And you have to be okay with that. Like, it's interesting. Some of the customers we're signing now, like we've been talking for 2 to 3 years with, and they've had to evolve before they purchased our product, and that's okay. So I don't know, to answer your question, I think messaging is critical. A lot of companies struggle with this, and I don't think we ever get it perfect, but messaging has to be treated like a product, just like pricing should be treated like a product. And I think, what we've done really well is kind of tap into the frustrations that almost everyone has had in a customer experience. Like, I think we've all been a part of a process where we've been frustrated because we haven't been kept on the same page, whether it's, qualifying for a mortgage, a home buying experience, not being updated on, the product that you bought online. Like, everyone kind of relates to, like, I get it. Like, we never get on a sales call when we're talking to a prospective customers and they say, I don't agree with the premise. It's all about, how are you solving that? Like,
right.
How am I going to take that frustration that I know I've had in my life and solve it for my customers that might have that frustration with my company?
And the pain and the challenge is pretty universal. It's just, okay, how are you actually solving it?
Yeah. And I think messaging that's been what's kept customers, interested in us for 3 years before they purchased. Their organization has come around, and then we've come around too with additional products and features that make us 10 times better than what they might be using today. So that's why I say category creation requires some patience. People need to be holistically bought into not only the vision, but how you're solving the problem. And that's the impetus, right? That's when the hockey stick growth occurs.
Right. I am a big believer in, organization trying to figure out how to articulate those key value propositions. What makes them unique? Were there any ways that you kind of evolved over time to help hone in that message and come up with that articulation of who and what you are and why people should buy?
So there's three things I'd say. One is growth helps you articulate that message. You can't articulate it without customers telling you,
right,
how they think what your value proposition is. So, like one of the things we do on kind of on the 50th web session, 100th web session, and 1000th web session, we survey our customers, and one of the questions we ask is, what problem do you believe you're solving with our tool? And we have a cool word cloud that shows up in our BI tool. And it's amazing, right? How what we perceive as our value prop, how that has evolved over time based on what our customers perceive. So that's the first thing. The second thing is review sites. Like we've driven a ton of reviews on G2 Crowd. That provides kind of that unbiased opinion, if you will, of your product. So it's not us surveying them. It's like organic reviews going to this site and telling us the good, the bad, the ugly, right? And and then the third thing is, I would say comes from the team. Like what I tell people is like our go to the moon message is, we want to facilitate the tracking of any product or service that doesn't fit in the box. So that might include, automatically creating a guide for someone who's trying to put together IKEA piece of furniture. But we're not there yet. In order for us to get there, we got to build the machine, the rockets. And, in order for us to do that, we got to conquer the SaaS space. And, cater to this specific use case. And that aspirational message kind of goes into play into what your core messaging is today. So you can't just rely on, well, this is what we do today, and this is how we're going to message it. Seeing your brand mature, like, has to consider what your aspirational qualities and where your product's going in the future.
That's another big topic for me, is vision creation. That's always been something I've really paid attention to. Are there aspects that you've done to like define a vision and articulate that to your team and get everybody rallied behind it?
Yeah, I think, one, it's been very organic up until about 2 years in. And then, we came together as an executive team and we said, hey, what do we want all of our new hires, all of our, prospective customers, what do we want them to believe that we are? And that's where we came up with like a product vision, if you will. That's, tracking products don't fit in a box, being the FedEx, shipping and handling fee for digital solutions, right? Like, kind of revolving around all about, hey, how do we optimize this delivery process such that, everyone's kept on the same page, and GuideCX is looked at as this tool that, provides you a stamp of credibility during your implementation effort. So I think 2 years in was the first time we said, hey, this is our vision from a product standpoint. Before that, I think it would have been hard to, really articulate that based on where we were going. Like one of the companies I really admire is Slack, Stuart Butterfield. Like that guy was, building a chat product for video games. And then he pivoted and, initiated a chat product for like B2B communication. And so if they would have created a vision statement, like on their first day, right, it wouldn't have applied. So I think it evolves over time and you're constantly iterating on it. I think the same has to do with like your company values. That's evolution. If you try to come out with company values before you demonstrate those values, it kind of comes across as insincere.
Yep. Yeah, that's been something for me. It took me years to figure out our core values, and now they really are truly pillars. They're not what I call the vanity values, where you're just doing it for show or whatever. And I've seen organizations do that. Have you been able to develop core values that really define your team and that you utilize on a regular basis?
No.
That's a good answer.
Yeah.
I mean, and I appreciate it because it's honest, right?
Yeah. I mean, we've more followed the standpoint of, as we kind of accepted our first professional money investment, we came together as an exec team and said, hey, what qualities do we want our employees to, demonstrate?
Yep.
And how are we going to interview to those qualities? What questions are we going to ask during this interview process? And, we kind of came together and said, hey, we want, to interview kind, people, optimistic, curious, people with excellent work ethic, people that are empathetic, that are self-aware, that, have great judgment. Like those are great, like aspirational qualities that we felt like, hey, if we can get our first 100 hires to have these qualities,
yeah,
we're gonna do okay. That doesn't necessarily mean that those are our values,
right.
well,
But that's pretty close. I think that defines the type of person that you want.
But after your 100th employee, I think then you can kind of turn around and say, okay, well, what are our values?
Right.
Like, what is the team demonstrating that's important to them? And I think we're almost to that point to where, we kind of, be super introspective, and that doesn't come from me. I can't define those. Like they have to be organically created. And that at previous organizations I've been a part of, we've thrown value statements up on the wall and no one relates to it because maybe the organization isn't, showing that value.
Yeah.
And so in order to truly build that culture, it has to come organically and in its own time. But what you can do, and what we've tried to do, is interview to, the values and the qualities that we want people to have. And I think, I have 4 girls. I would let any one of our employees babysit my girls. I don't know if that would be a good experience for them, but
yeah, right.
That's how much I think of our employees. Like we've built an incredible team, and it makes just me excited to come to work every Monday.
Yeah.
And it's part of the cool part about building a company. You pick and choose who you want to work with, and it just becomes super fun.
That's a really interesting description. But I agree with you. When we hire, it is all about trying to get people to align to these values that we want and the people that we want to be around. And I think that's created a much stronger organization. But I really love that analogy of, I have 2 daughters myself, so I get it.
Yeah, I'm sure your daughters would be much more well-behaved than mine.
Yeah, you never know.
It's a wasp nest when I come home every day.
So we've talked a little bit about hiring, but that is a big piece. And again, our audience is typically other founders. What was it like finding those initial employees, and how has building the team been since you started the company?
Yeah, I think we're still in the honeymoon stage of hiring.
Okay.
Meaning that, a lot, like almost every single one of our employees has come to us through a network effect. Meaning we haven't like hired an outside recruiter. It's like, I would say the first like 30 to 40 employees come from some relationship from the founding team. And then you get on that second level, like, hey, the better leaders you hire, the more network effect you're going to have, because they're going to have people that wanted to follow them and have followed them around. And I think that will always be true. But, when you're trying to satisfy the demands of your customer and grow as fast as we're growing, it requires a little more gas, right? And so we're just kind of going over that hump right now of, all right, we have a little less than 100 employees. We want to be 200-ish by the end of this year, in the first quarter next year. And can our own network provide that growth? I don't know. It's time for us to hire an in-house recruiter, right? Start sourcing and getting a little more mature on that front. But to date, we've been fortunate where the better we hire up front, the better network effect we're going to have, and the more people are just going to organically come. And Utah is a phenomenal scene as well. That helps.
What'd you say?
Utah is a phenomenal work environment as well. It's a great place to build a business. A lot of great people around us.
That's fantastic. How'd you find some of the leadership team? Because those can be difficult to find, folks that you really want to put in that position. Was that your own network and network effect? And how did you, really build that core team for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, my co-founder, Todd White, he and I worked together for 10, 12 years, know each other extremely well and understand each other's, pros and cons. And, we work, I mean, I couldn't ask for a better teammate. Todd and I had a really good friend who introduced us to our now COO, who was, hired as a director of operations. Harris Clark came from Domo, and phenomenal person. Couldn't think of a better person to represent ourselves in GuideCX. Just everyone loves him. He's been phenomenal. Harris brought us our CTO, someone who he worked with at Domo, but then transitioned to Ancestry.com, another big company here in Utah. And then my CFO was, he was an individual who was helping me early on. He was my neighbor.
Wow.
He was kind of a comp controller for Skull Candy, and then he worked for another big tech company. And I would say he could have been kind of my first employee, but he was, I couldn't afford him, so he was doing a lot of just work for out of his own goodwill. And we finally got big enough to where I felt like, and he felt like, hey, it's necessary for him to come on board. And so, the executive team that's been built out is, all network. We haven't hired anyone from a recruiting agency, and we're still all together. And so,
how have you seen your role change? I'm always interested in that. As the founder, you start out day one with an idea, you're kind of doing all these different things, but then as the organization evolves and you get close to 100 people, what does your role look like now?
I think there's like two stages. One is like early on, I had to be the product evangelist. Like I had to, sell the vision. I was on every demo, and I still love to be close to that. But like that, establishing some semblance of product market fit was on my back. And then you hire people, right, that are professionals at what we're asking them to do. Like I wasn't a professional at product, right? I was a salesperson in my last career, and someone who just obsessed around pleasing the customer. And I transitioned out of kind of that mode when I hired, our CTO, who was kind of a engineer and a product expert. And then we hired our VP of product. And that stage two is cool because, I think it happened when we kind of crossed the chasm of, 2 to 3 million of ARR, where like things started happening. Like I'd sit in meetings with our release, readiness process and say like, oh, wow, like I didn't know we were launching that. That's awesome. And it's like humbling and it's maddening, but it's enjoyable. And it's like, you feel all sorts of emotions knowing that like there's things that are being decided upon without your input. But I think that's normal, right? That should happen. And so now it's like I'm in team building mode. And I think that's the second stage of, okay, once you hire that kind of first layer of management team, if you do it right, they'll start making decisions for you and kind of taking on those siloed, responsibilities that you once were having to take on. And then you can focus on kind of building and recruiting and helping them build their teams. So that's how my roles changed. And I think the CEO, in my stage, like I don't say I deal with HR in a negative tone. Like I get to understand what drives people and what, go out to lunch with, just random people in our organization. And I think that like that stuff I wouldn't have had time for early on either.
Did you struggle at all handing off those reins? Because I know for some founders, they do, letting go of the product or letting go of the marketing or letting go of whatever is painful.
Yeah, I did. I mean, I remember we use a chat tool within our product to support our current customers called Intercom. And I'm obsessive about like responding right away to a customer's question. And I still get in there sometimes, but remember Harris came to me after I hired him. He's my COO now. But Harris came to me and he said, hey, give me your phone. And I gave him my phone, and he deleted the intercom app. He goes, "This isn't your job anymore.
That's great.
Like, you need to let me and my team handle our customers." And that was, that was hard for me.
I love it though.
Yeah, but like, kudos to Harris for having the confidence to come to me and help me become better, right? Because if I was still focused on that level of the business and not trusting my people to do what I needed them to do, it would have hurt the business. And so, like, that's hiring a great person. That's just one example. Like, I can share my sales leaders done something similar to me.
Well, I think that's a great lesson for others that are listening, of hiring people that are willing to come and push you, out of your comfort zone, out of your day-to-day, whatever it might be, versus hiring a bunch of people that are just going to answer yes to whatever you want.
Yeah. Well, I think that there's that concept, I call it managing upward. And I think in organizations, when you have individuals that manage upward and horizontally, exponential growth occurs.
Yeah.
And that takes, I mean, it's aspirational. I don't think we're perfect at it, but it takes managers that are more humble. You have to remove pride out of the organization. Like, if one of our engineers can make me better, my CTO can't be intimidated by that. So it's, it's very, like, Harris, tons of people exude that quality in our organization, but to really embrace it and encourage it requires a disciplined approach. Because I have to be humble too. Like, Harris was very, I wasn't humble early on. Like, I was responding to every chat. Like, if you didn't respond in 30 seconds, I was in there at 15 seconds. And it was after hours. And I'm like, well, Harris, I don't expect you to respond at 11 p.m. at night, to our UK customers just waking up. And, I want you to have a work-life balance. And he goes, no, that's my problem to solve.
That's great though. I love it. I think it's a good story to help folks understand how you need to evolve as a founder.
Yeah.
So just one other topic that I'd love to touch a little bit on is fundraising. You mentioned that bootstrapping in the beginning, starting to raise capital. Founders struggle with that because when do I do it? It becomes a full-time job sometimes to just go out there and raise capital and deal with investors. What has been your experience of the whole bootstrapping to raising and how that looked?
I think when I decided to take money from outside investors, I personally needed to get my head around the fact that I wasn't going to lose someone else's money. For me, like, I can live with losing my own. Like, I told my wife, I said, hey, listen, we're going to go on this adventure. This is the amount of money we're going to spend. She allowed me to spend double that. But, like, if
the
this
real CFO in the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. I told her, if this doesn't work, like, I'll go get a job at Podium or Lucid, or, like, we have tons of awesome companies here in the Utah Valley. And, like, so what's the risk? Like, I don't, that's kind of how I shaped the process to her. And she's been just a rock star throughout the whole process. And she's made it so, like, if I fail, I know that she wouldn't think any less of me. Like, that provided me a ton of confidence to, just go all in. And so that was the same kind of relationship I wanted to have with our first investors. And so we raised a friends and family round, probably about 18 months in. And that was the former CEO of the last company I worked for, and then the CTO as well. And then we raised a VC funding round, a venture round, about a year after that. And one of the things, like, I knew, obviously, our first friends and family investors, right, for most of my life. But these VC investors, they had been, Album was our first seed round, Album venture capital firm. Those guys, like, I had known for at least a year, right? They were kind of, we had some of their portfolio companies on our product. They had seen us get brought up in board meetings. And I probably said no to them 20 times before I said yes.
Wow. Huh.
And I only said yes because the relationship got to a point to where I knew if I failed, they wouldn't think any less of me. Like that's kind of my barometer for a positive relationship. If things go sour and this goes downhill fast, their first thought in their mind isn't, well, Peter's a lazy SOB.
Yeah.
And I could say that about Sorensen, our Series A partner, and I can say that about Meritech, our Series B partner, and then all of the other investors that are involved. It's like I'm only comfortable taking the money when they know that who I am, what drives me, the passion behind our people in our organization. Like the last thing I'd ever do is, if someone sends me a term sheet, I'll go shop that term sheet and then go with someone that I just met a week ago.
Right.
It's that takes all the fun out of the process, because then you're not working people that you have relationships with.
I think that fits the way that I always think about it. You talked about bootstrapping. Is I think you bootstrap a product to a point that, you bring in investors when you want to scale and you've got some leverage.
Yeah.
And it sounds like, in your case, it was, I didn't bring on money until people were begging me to take it.
Yeah.
Which isn't that a great place to be?
And like before I saw, like we had like 350K of ARR before we took money, and it was thoughtful, growth. It wasn't a rocket ship, but what really provided me the peace of mind and kind of convinced me that I wasn't going to lose money is when 50% of our revenue was driven from our current customers. And like when I saw that expansion growth, that wheel starting to turn. That's where I felt like, okay, like users love us enough to double down on us,
right?
To pay us more than the initial contract value. And so it was 80, that early number was 80% of our customers expanded their initial contract value.
Wow.
And it was cool to share to Album, to kind of, our first seed investor, to say, hey, like, this is why you should be excited. But honestly, I don't think they calculated that into why they wanted to invest. Like the relationship was already far enough along where they felt like, yeah, like we would expect that.
That's awesome. So before I ask you my final question, what's in the future for GuideCX? Like what's it look like the next year?
So we'll double our employee size. We just moved into a cool new office space outside of kind of the warehouse space that we were in. So we were in like Class D space, and now we're in, we've grown up. So, all of the employees are super excited to, kind of recognize what our accomplishments were in the past. And, now we're living up to them. The product itself, we have some phenomenal, we're hyper focused on this handoff stage. And so our goal is to cater to the lowest common denominator of user, right? The number one problem most implementation managers say they have is engaging their customers. And we have, a broad spectrum of users that are trying to be engaged by our customers. So our constant, mentality is, well, hey, how do we improve that engagement score? A year ago, 1 in 5 GuideCX projects represented engagement by our litmus test. And that was customers completing their own deliverables, updating their own tasks, uploading attachments, adding notes. Like they had to do all 4 of those things. Now, like today, it's 4 out of every 5 projects. So 80% of the projects that customers of our customers are invited to engage. And our goal is 100% engagement. So that's one. The second thing is we have a organizational goal to integrate with 100 different integrated partners. So we have Salesforce, HubSpot, Slack, kind of the more common tech stack things, but like integrating with Gong and, Outlook 365 and the Gmail suite. So we have a cool, product strategy to evolve to that point. We've already launched some of those integrations in beta that just allow us to do some super cool things, like optimizing the, meeting scheduling experience within our own application through integration effort. Seeing everyone's availability in real time. So those 2 things, employee growth, 100 integrated partners, and then, focusing on engaging every single customer that gets invited to a GuideCX project. we do those three things, we'll be set up for a lot of success into the future. Our goal isn't to expand in the customer success and continue to manage the whole account lifecycle. I think there's a huge TAM, huge total available market available in just this handoff experience of getting someone from a point of sale to getting them to use your product or service.
That's exciting. So just as a kind of wrap up question that I ask every founder that I talk to is, if you were able to go into the past and have coffee with yourself, what advice would you give?
Failure is a temporary condition. I would also say that, relationships are what, when you're in a startup environment, nothing can create relationships like the fiery furnace. Like it's, I had no idea kind of the level of friendships I would have at this stage based on all that we've gone through as a team. Yeah. And so savoring that process, like not being so frustrated in the moment. Like I'm by nature just impatient, right? Every product release is like Christmas to me. And then I get excited about the next product release the next day. And so just slowing down a little bit. That's a great question. I'll have to think about that more.
Yeah. We'll give you another chance to answer it later. Awesome, Peter. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time. And I think it was some fantastic ideas and thoughts that we talked about.
Yeah, I appreciate all you do. Thanks so much for, I've listened to a few of the podcasts and learned a ton. So I appreciate what you're contributing.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you everybody for joining me. Go check out GuideCX, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thanks again, Peter.
See you later. Thanks, Andy.